Hey, Buddha went hard.
Buddha really went hard, like really went hard, which is like crazy as shit. What's up, guys? Today I've got someone who is one of the best analysts I think that's out there in the poker world, and he's come from Wall Street. Actually, he spent 13 years on Wall Street, and to be an analyst in poker is a growing need in the poker world, with poker getting so analytical and requiring software, and it's not everyone's skill set to be able to do this. And in fact, I've hired Bill because he's so good at his job, and I thought it'd be good to have him on the podcast. Anytime like what the play is that you're supposed to do is really obvious, you should like reconsider to see if there are other possibilities where you can create situations where other people can make mistakes, because the more mistakes people make, the more money is potentially made.
That's exactly it. I mean, this is what I tell my students is you don't want to help the other guy play perfect by accident.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. You want to help them to not play perfectly.
Exactly.
We could it's really tempting to veer off into philosophy for at least a second. I don't want to spend the whole podcast on this because I just don't know how much like pure philosophy or something really like a bit esoteric resonates with the audience. But we'll go there for a second. On the concept of the truth, the big realization was in fact that it looked like many, I forget if we disagreed on this or not, but it looked like a lot of the religions, or certain like the general theme of them, I should say, was lining up very, very closely to what I considered the optimal reality. As I was thinking of that in my mind, like, okay, what about this concept? There's this concept of playing poker optimally. Well, why not just like live life optimally? And what does that look like? And so, actually, it looked like, in fact, that many of the religions did. It's more complicated than this, but at least like Christianity and the Judaistic religions, in fact, described what was close to what would be an optimized society. Like if you looked at what various leaders of those religions would say, it describes strategies in order for these groups to function optimally, especially within their own like complicated societal situations. Moses, for example, there's lots of reasons, at least according to Machiavelli, why Moses had to behave the way he did in order to run this like group of like refugees that could have totally been invaded by like absolutely everyone, and in the ancient times. So his like strategy was actually quite a bit different than other strategies, and I mean that could have been set for Muhammad. And Jesus would approach things more on like a grander scale, and now the whole idea, or giving, like, you could say that he gave a strategy to everybody, at least from a certain perspective. But and then when you go into Hinduism and Buddhism, things become a little bit more complicated too. But I found that to be really interesting, and that's kind of what I've been exploring lately. Is like, okay, what is this like truth of an optimal reality? And I've had various moments of disillusion with that, but this concept of pursuing truth is not that far away, although it may seem that to be. I mean, this is what the religions or whatever speak of all the time. It's like truth, okay. Well, it has to match with the religions if it's truth. It has to match like the full, whole scientific view, or it's all bullshit. So I've been like wrestling with that a lot, and that's why I've been going to India and like checking out gurus and seeing if they can handle some science and some rationality. Yeah, I've had mixed avail with all of this. It's kind of been messing with me pretty hard.
So totally. So first of all, I would say that if you think about it, it actually makes sense that the different religion, what they prescribe, for it to make sense instead of not make sense, because there's a bit of a survivorship bias. If they did not make sense, people who follow them are less likely to survive, let alone flourish. So for it to make it through thousands of years, to have a large community following those rules and do well, is sort of like a litmus test in and of itself, that it works. So there's a survivorship bias in that the religions who tell you to, hey, number one of religion, go kill yourself. Well, that's not going to live for long because there's no one to follow. So that's an obviously
No one's
extreme
gonna sign up for
example.
that one.
But
Yeah.
if you're like, oh, let's all bond together, let's not steal from each other, let's not murder each other, don't steal each other's spouses, let's just live peacefully and prosper. Well, yeah, that makes sense, and the people who follow that will prosper. And so there's a bit of a survivorship bias, not in the sense that it's negative or anything, but it's a way to explain why the surviving wisdom makes sense. And the second thing I have to say to that is. Right, just the fact that it survived for so long and it worked for so many people means that a lot of practical wisdom, even if you take the literal interpretation out of the way on like what is out there in the universe. Like if you just say these are ways, systems of living, tested by time, tested by people, forget like what economics or psychology tells us. These are the 80-20s of rules of thumb that work when all the other stuff gets stripped away. These are like the couple rules that really drive the action. And I think you can find them through like practical philosophy, stuff like that. So that makes a lot of sense. So extreme example is commandment number 1, go kill yourself. Obviously, there'll be no one left, and such religion wouldn't survive for very long. But instead, the commandments are more like don't steal from each other, be nice, help your neighbor, don't murder anyone. It makes sense. The community prospers, and so it gets passed down from generations to generations. So survivorship bias, in a sense, not in the sense that it's anything nefarious, but just a way to explain why they make sense, why we see communities that adopt such rules flourish, that there's wisdom in those. And the other thing I was saying is that I love that you're going to India and studying different religion, because just like we're talking about with GTO, you can go really deep in one way of approaching the game, but the marginal benefit would kind of taper off. Of course, I'm not talking about the religious aspect as much as the wisdom you gain. So right, going to GTO, you keep studying this perfect line. You run out of stuff to study, and the line that you do go down to the rabbit hole will be more rare. Whereas if you go through the approach that we were talking about, like, oh, let's shake the sims up, no lock here and there. Let's see if they take more of the suboptimal lines. What happened? You get to understand the game more comprehensively. So to me, like, I love that you're going to India and study different religions because you're basically exploring uh, wisdom that would traditionally be outside of your reach because they're not what you're comfortable with and don't by default align with the value of people around you and the environment that you grew up in. And those wisdoms work for those people and they could very well work for you. But instead, the way the world is, we live in our corner and they live in their corner. We think they're crazy and they think we're crazy. And we end up ignoring each other's. But when you go and reach over to the other side, you get to collect nuggets of wisdom that other people offer that you might not be able to find within your own system of knowledge. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, and actually, what you said is precisely the reason why I decided to go to multiple different cultures and multiple different, spiritual, you know, uh, like enlightened people or whatever you want to call them, or gurus or whatever. Because I was curious, I presumed, and in fact, this has been more or less the case. It's actually been like very much a lot of things that are hard to like get to work together. But I mostly think I've created a system that does work together that unites all perspectives. But you do get pieces of what the full picture is through most of these, or through everyone collectively. And it should, at some point, unite with logic. Matter of fact, there was a religious person, a guru of sorts, whatever you want to call him, or seemed. I thought he achieved enlightenment. Maybe not, but he was very, very had a very, very high level. This guy, Vivek Nanda, who was an outright genius, that said something that I personally thought was. I mean, I had the exact same view, which was basically that uh, any religion now has to face the full light of reason. He said this like back in the early 1900s or whatever. when he's like running around giving lectures at the University of Chicago, etc. He's very famous. Um, and Yeah, I mean, like you said, a lot of them kind of worked for each other in their own like various cultures. For example, one little known fact is, in the Islamic culture, which arose out of issues with Christianity, by the way, and there was this thing of like, okay, it actually they eat beef or whatever, but in the Hindu culture, they worship the cow and they eat vegetarian food. The whole like cultures are wildly different, and the whole areas were wildly different. People don't know that actually at one point India was the most powerful country in the world. It owned like 30% of the commerce of the world or some crazy shit like that. I mean, now I figured out why it's a mess right now, or the big reason, or one big reason anyway, is it's wildly overpopulated. But in these Arabic countries, going vegetarian was not exactly a possibility, so they had to eat meat. That was their like their exploitative adjustment. There are some religions that have persisted for a very long time, kind of oddly, or some cultures kind of oddly, subcultures, but in spite of the fact that they don't optimize for existing in the real world. Actually, precisely Buddhism to its extreme, which is kind of interesting. It's a weird thing, but it works in a strange way. That's what really intrigued me at Buddhism, is it just almost didn't make sense. But Christianity actually mostly does. It seems mostly oriented towards the prospering of the culture. Matter of fact, many of the systems from Christianity and the social structure from Christianity really helped to. It has some hidden benefits, even though now it's been like really twisted in many ways into a weird culture that you're kind of mentioning. That is like this culture that we now. There's actually a word, an acronym for it. It's called WE.I.R.D. Have you heard of this weird culture?
No, I haven't actually.
Okay, well, WE.I.R.D stands for a very common first world culture, and a lot of even like smart first world people don't. This is a little bit of a sub tour before I go back into what I was talking about Christianity. But anyway, it has to do with Christianity, by the way. But it's Western, educated, industrialized, rich. What's the word? What's the last one? Democratic societies, and this basically just describes a lot of first world culture today. Most people don't
Hmm.
realize that they're like kind of existing in this like really unusual culture in comparison to the rest of the world. But yeah, because of the it's because partly because anyway of like the really strong infrastructure that Christianity had created that
Uh-huh.
ultimately led to partly of the forming of this. But there are many like things that were institutionalized, like marriage, etc., that actually did have some subtle benefits from this religion that are now kind of falling apart. But anyway, basically, what your points are right. It's just that it's hard to know really all the benefits, all the like. It's hard to put all the pieces together, but that's one of the reasons why going to India and all that is where I'm at, and going on these crazy trips and doing ayahuasca and all this sorts of stuff.
I mean, going back to your point about the crazy guru, yeah, I guess statistically it's more likely that we find wisdom in people who are proven to be wise. But it doesn't preclude the possibility that you're going to find it in the most random places. At the end of the day, we are the ultimate judge of what works for us and what we consider to be truth or not. Because otherwise, you know, how do we determine anything? Like we just gonna listen to the next guy on the street. In one extreme, we're just gonna listen to anybody. They tell us to give them all the money and go run to the wall. Sure. On the other extreme, you're gonna find the most prominent, the biggest mega church, the biggest religion leader, and say they must be right. And we know how that goes. At the end of the day, there's a lot of personal responsibility in how we navigate the world. And I like your approach in that you're going around and contrasting different views and decide for yourself what makes sense and what doesn't. And to me, like I think that's ultimately the way to do. That is I don't know what else to do except for that.
Yeah, I
It
get a
takes
lot of
more
shit
work for
for it, by
sure.
the way. Yeah, it does. It takes the most amount of work, actually. But it gets you the actual truth. And you're right. Matter of fact, there's a weird aspect of the truth that you can't really. It kind of is. There's an aspect of it that is able to be only able to be judged by the person viewing it. That still can be solved, by the way. I thought of a pretty graceful solution to that. That
Hmm.
works. It's just a matter of people. Basically, everyone just has to go through their own motions of sorts. At least it makes sense as I go through my own. Um, but yeah, it's the same thing in poker, really. The more you contrast various views and the more you close yourself off, you close off your own progress. And actually, in this whole spiritual development thing, there was this guy people don't know about too much, Jida Krishnamurti, very famous guy as well. He was the leader of an organization that had a lot. Their purpose was precisely to pursue the truth. And then one day, this guy comes out and says, "You know what? Uh, I'm done leading you guys. I can't lead you guys to find the truth. You guys have to find it on your own. And this is not like an act of virtue or anything. Don't follow me because you guys have to follow yourselves." This is a
Uh-huh.
funny thing. But yes, that's the ultimate answer. These gurus or whatever, it appears they're more like how do you say, more like the something you like a guide up to a certain point, and then at some point you follow yourself is what it looks like is true, as you said. Religious affiliation or spiritual affiliation or not. Um, but this is said in a lot of different ways, by the way, even though it doesn't appear to be said. It seems like your intuition was right. I thought, in fact, that you told me you were atheist or agnostic or something, but I don't remember.
Yeah, yeah, more or less. Atheist slash agnostic, more on the former than the latter. But I have a lot of emotional connection, let's put it that way, with Buddhism, because it really speaks out to me. It makes a lot of sense to the point where I named my daughter after one of the Buddhist tenet. Her name is Anika, Annicca, and it's one of the core uh, Buddhist tenets. I think in Tibetan Buddhism, it translates roughly to impermanence. Is to remember that we're all going to die one day and everything will cease to exist. And paradoxically, on the surface, it's kind of a doom and gloom message. But when you really think about it, it's ultimately extremely liberating because it reminds you that here and now is what's real, and we cannot sit around forever as though we'll live forever. And if you want to do something meaningful with your life, you should probably do it now. It's kind of like a lot of Western philosophers had the same thoughts. I believe it was Heidegger that say something along the line of death creates meaning. Yeah, or even like the Book of Five Rings, I think, the samurai book. They say like a warrior should have death in his mind at all time. I mean, they mean it in a slightly different context, but I think the message is clear in that don't don't act as though that the game will go on forever, that we are immortals, that we're living in some kind of virtual environment that might open a whole lot of can of worms. But don't act like we're playing a video game. Basically, we're bone and flesh and blood, and we will cease to exist. And to create meaning here and now is what we're to do. Don't as though we live in some fairyland. And to me, that is a very important message that I personally took from Buddhism, and that I found a lot of practical wisdom from concepts that I learned from Buddhism.
Okay, that makes sense. It's feels like kind of funny coming from someone who says they're agnostic, but yeah, sure. Um, I mean, okay, well, it's sort of the same thing actually. Matter of fact, but Buddhism doesn't really, or at least Buddha didn't really consider the question of whether God existed to be like really a valid question. He like almost ignored this
Exactly.
question, which is one funny thing about him. There's a few funny things about his way of doing things. Yeah, a lot of people don't know a lot of details of his life. I read a book about his life, but he was like a very crazy guy. Uh, he's just like, he like abandoned everything to like
Hmm.
exist on like a grain of rice at some point, and got like kind of harassed by people. He's just like some random bum at some point when he's like in his 30s, like a random bum at some point, like on the streets, just like walking around, and he left like a lot of wealth for all that. I thought that was interesting. And just he actually ate his own piss or drank his own piss and ate his own shit, allegedly in his book. Like what the man?
Hey, Buddha went hard.
Buddha really went hard, like really went hard, which is like crazy as shit. Yeah, I think we'll wrap up this discourse for a little second. Let's talk a bit more about poker because we got some stuff coming up. For one thing, you co-founded Octopi. I didn't know that, by the way. I didn't know you co-founded Octopi with Victoria Livchitz, I think is her name, and LuckyChewy.
Yeah, so we met Victoria and we were trying to get her to use poker software, basically. We're teaching her how to study, and she refused. She having came from a tech background herself, she founded one of the earliest cloud companies, so she's hardcore techie. She basically said the existing software offended her senses, and we're not just talking about Monker here. We're talking about Pio, Wizard, whatever else out there. She doesn't like the software. It drove her mad. She doesn't like the interface. She thinks ugly is sin. And she thinks it should be done a different way. Chewy and I were always looking for the new tools, and we're trying to, had to work our way around to get what we really want instead of having easy ways without getting too technical to get what we're trying to do. And so, as you can imagine, eventually what happened was we were sitting around and go, hey, why don't we just build our own thing? Victoria, you get to build a solver the way you want to using clouds. Everyone is running servers. We do it on cloud. We do like the more modern technology instead of, the older stuff. And we used the interface in a way that is completely redesigned instead of carrying over the legacy setup. And on the poker side, Chewy and I, having spent so much time looking at Sims all day, there's something we want that don't exist. We decided to form a company. On the tech side, of course, Victoria would apply her expertise and build it with clouds instead of the solver, which is just a more efficient way to scale up your computing power. That's all we need to know about it. And we wanted to redesign the GUI from the ground up, both based on what she knows about interface design and what me and Chewy and Nick and other pros like my friend Johan of what we wish existed that doesn't exist in the current tools. It's a really, really sweet product.
I do understand that Octopi is making the user experience for solvers a lot more palatable, as Victoria is suggesting. So it sounds very interesting. I'd like to see it in action.
Totally.
So it sounds like it brings something novel to the table and helps assess spots in a way that makes it a lot easier, which is really useful. I've had you do some coursework that is designed to help people beat large fields, especially at the WSOP. That'll be part of the approach with what I am aiming for with the Jungleverse, as we're calling it. So there's that, and it'll be like kind of a how-to to get people up to speed to like how to like win in a pretty, a certain important section of the poker market. I would say be one of the approaches of what the Jungleverse will be doing.
This is not a beginner's course, nor is it an advanced course. What we're really addressing are concepts that we think is what drives poker strategy. And we try to deliver the content in a way that is very clear, in plain English, and in a way that is actionable by using real hand examples that will pop up, when you go sit down and play a poker tournament. But we're not holding back and try to dumb it down. We're going straight to the meat of the theory. This is definitely theory-driven, in that the ultimate goal is to introduce ideas that are driving basically, modern poker strategy. So we can onboard people into what's out there in terms of analysis. Namely, in this case, the Jungleverse, to introduce idea and a common language so that they can move on to more advanced material.
It's echoes part of what I believe to be an important approach towards poker, which is to not get so caught up in the weeds with like really extreme theory and to go for the things that really matter. And with WSOP coming up, I think it's really important to. Well, we're aiming to help a lot of people to make quite a bit of money in a variety of different fields, but especially like the big fields such as the Gladiator, the Mystery Bounty, and the Main Event, and all of that. And this course will be aimed at people who are looking to win at those kinds of fields and be, a large percentage of the population. It's not quite it. It won't help to dominate like top pros or anything like that. But we're aiming towards a large group of people, and I think. Yeah, the big key that we're focusing on lately at the Jungleverse is WSOP. We'll also be having, we'll be launching around May 21st. The plan is May 21st. And we'll be having a special WSOP bootcamp training program with a bunch of the people who have won main events in the past, well, not main events, bracelets in the past. And we'll be giving lectures on how to win those bracelets. And there'll be another one of our coaches joining, Gel, who will be assisting with the seminar as well to provide people whatever they need in terms of what's not going to overwhelm them with, what's not going to overwhelm you guys with, like tons and tons of material to beat these events, but just these last minute information that should help put you guys to have a good edge against the common competition at these sorts of events. But basically, we're going to take WSOP down, and we're going to do it in a way that's not going to burn all our time, burn all of your time, and also get you up to a pretty good speed really fast. That's the idea. You got to capitalize on WSOP, which is a really good time to make money. And as a side note, the main focus of my community, as we're now calling it the Jungleverse, is that I'm aspiring to help you guys succeed to really make money and fulfill whatever your goals are. And that doesn't mean, at least in my mind, it's not really going to mean being the most technically advanced, period, although we'll have all of that. It's going to be more a matter of like using your time wisely and finding the right spots and learning the right skills that will be appropriate for whatever you're doing. In this case, crushing WSOP, but we're also going to be focusing in a variety of different areas, such as how to become an influencer at some point, creating a jobs market and all of that. Also finding the right spots in other areas when things are not so obvious and there's not just a WSOP hanging around. That's the overall theme of the community, and it'll be echoed through Phil's work and also through this bootcamp that we're launching.
Exciting stuff. We got a lot of work coming up.